Raven. Cisco is our interviewee for today. Raven, you're going to be talking to me about the 5 lessons that you did last week with your sophomore level honors students, or 2A students. And you were, I think in the 2nd week, was it, Like Water for Chocolate?
Like, we did a half week beforehand.
That's right, yes,
yeah.
yes, you had the 2 days beforehand. And what I've, as you know, what I've asked you to do is to look at it in terms of the coming to terms move that Terry Harris suggests, where you assess what you think went particularly well, and what are some things that you might do a little differently if you were to do it again.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with something that I think went well, but maybe I could have done it a little better. So it's kind of on both sides of that.
Nice.
So
yeah,
I introduced reading responses to my sophomores for the first time based on Bonnie Cox's method from San Jose State.
Right.
And I had every chapter that they read, they had to go home and write a reading response that was a paragraph that included a quote and their analysis of that quote.
Right.
And
So they could choose any quote from the chapter.
yes, any quote from the chapter.
Right, but they had to say why they had chosen that quote.
Yeah, it had to be a quote of significance in order for them to write commentary on it.
Right.
So if something struck them and they learned something about a character or about the relationships between character, or there was foreshadowing, or they wanted to make a prediction about what was going to happen next, those were the kind of quotes I wanted them to choose.
Right.
So
And
something that struck their thoughts.
Right, and you gave them some examples of passages they could select and what they might say about them, or how did you guide them in terms of just coming to some understanding of what passages they might select?
So
reading response quotes.
We previously had gone over some. We'd done dialectical journals picking quotes that included imagery, so that was a quote that I specifically guided them to.
Right.
And they wrote commentary on that imagery. So how does that imagery change, like how does that influence the description of the character, or tell you maybe how the character's feeling, or some sort of commentary, which we frame with this quote shows.
Right, so this was a little like the dialectical journals, but probably a little bit longer in terms of the commentary that you wanted to make, that you wanted the students to make after they selected their quote.
Yeah, I transitioned them from dialectical journals, which they've done before last semester, into the reading response. So that dialectical journal kind of fits into the reading response paragraph.
Right.
They just needed to add a little bit more. So the topic, sentence, explanation, a longer commentary, and then the clincher.
Right. And your goal for, your hope for the students in writing these chapter by chapter reading responses was what?
So I guess I had a couple of hopes. One was that I haven't worked with them very much one-on-one with their writing, and I really wanted to do that, and I thought short pieces of writing would be easier for me to give quick feedback on.
Right.
And the other part of it was that I find that my students don't often get asked what they think, and are kind of just given answers, and these are the answers you need to give me. I wanted them to pick a quote that struck them particularly, because I wanted to show them that their opinions and analysis were valid to me, and that I wanted to work with those. And and they came up with some ideas and analysis of certain passages that I hadn't thought of, and it was very enlightening.
Right. And you're probably remembering something we've talked about occasionally in at least the teaching of writing, and that's that 2 of the strongest motivations for getting better writing, at least on the part of the writer, are being able to choose what they are to write about, and having some degree of autonomy in what they have to say about that. So it's like you'll be getting a slightly increased level of thoughtfulness in the reading responses. I'm sure that's why Professor Cox does that as well. And
I think the drawbacks, and kind of what I would do differently,
Right.
I assigned them a chapter a night and then a reading response a night. So it was very quick turnaround. Not a lot of time for them to write it and really think about it, and not a lot of time for me to give them meaningful feedback and timely feedback. So I think if I did it again, I would space out the reading and space out the time that they were given for reading responses, because when I did it, of course I was in a college course, so I had 2 days or several days between classes, so it made it a lot easier for me to sit down and get those done without having a million other things to do, which I'm sure my students do. So I think adjusting it to high school, I would spread it out more.
Right. so it's less overwhelming for you as a
Yeah.
teacher, because even though these writings are short, if you're getting, if you're getting 60 some each day, then that's a lot of reading to do.
Yeah, but they were resilient. I
Uh-huh.
think almost all of them got all of the reading responses done.
Really?
So,
Yeah.
and they weren't, completely awful.
Right.
Like, or poor, like just slapped onto the page. They were
Right.
pretty thoughtful.
Right, what about that dilemma that you would have, and that is, even though last week I assume Joe had at least partial responsibility for the ERWC class, so last week you
Yes,
could
he
focus.
taught the seniors last
Okay,
week.
so you could focus exclusively
Yes.
on the two English 2 classes, so that's a
Mhm.
help. But still, that's a lot of responses to have to deal with on a nightly basis.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with that?
So how I dealt with that. So on the first one, I gave them very thorough
Mhm.
responses. I went
Everyone.
through and I looked, everyone. And because Joe was
Did you
teaching the
get any sleep
seniors,
that night?
I was able to do it in the morning when
Okay,
he was teaching the seniors.
okay.
So that was very helpful.
Yes, right.
And I looked at everything, which may have been too much, but
Right. Yeah.
I looked at the grammar, I looked
Yeah.
at style, I
Yeah.
looked, and then at the end I would say, okay, so you've told me about the plot,
Uh-huh.
now tell me what that implies, or tell me what you've learned about this character.
Right.
Trying to kind of push them further.
Nice, yeah.
For the second through fourth reading responses,
Uh-huh.
or maybe second through fifth,
Uh-huh.
I didn't give as much feedback. I
Right.
maybe wrote a little bit of feedback if someone was still like, this is all plot, like I want something more than that.
Right.
But there was much less feedback on 2 through 5. And then the sixth one they brought into class and they workshopped it so I collected them and then I handed them out randomly and I gave them little half sheets and they had different levels. So at the bottom was student writing not observed.
Right.
And it was like if someone was like handed you their algebra homework, this
Right.
this is not an accurate representation of this
Right.
activity.
Right.
The next level up was just starting out, so this student summarizes plot,
Right.
but doesn't analyze anything.
Right.
And then the next one was writing apprentice, I think was the next one.
Nice.
So this student analyzes but on the surface level. And then
Right.
the last one was writing master.
Uh-huh.
This student analyzes thoughtfully and
Right. And they were peer reviewing one another's in
Mhm.
pairs or triads or?
so they were passed out
Or-
randomly, so I guess they were on their own but with somebody else's
I
paragraph.
see, so everyone was looking at one other person's,
Yeah.
paragraph.
And I said, okay, choose which level most accurately describes the paragraph you have.
Right.
And then in that box,
Uh-huh.
next to it, so there were boxes next to each one, just pick one
Right.
box
Right.
and then write how this student can move up to the next level. So this was very much inspired by Brent Dukeworth's workshop on rubrics and scoring guides. And I felt that, and there were no numbers on it, like it was
Right,
just,
that's for people who are listening, that's Dr. Dukor, who is one of the faculty members in the secondary education program, who's teaching you a course in assessment
yeah.
this same semester.
I've definitely been learning a lot and trying to integrate it, and it was very helpful because
Yeah.
previously I've had them look at peer writing with
Uh-huh.
rubrics with numbers, and so
Right.
evaluating, giving a score,
Right.
and I liked this a lot better.
Yeah, it gives you much clearer indication of what represents an improved performance. Okay, that's good. I think we can actually use our interview time to focus on this one activity, because it's actually very interesting in terms of what you did, but also what you have to say about it, and how it relates to your larger sense of what you're trying to teach your sophomore level students to do in terms of their reading and responding.
Yeah.
So swinging around to the other side and saying, okay, here are some things I want to do differently.
So definitely spacing out the reading responses
Right.
so I can
Yes.
give
Yeah.
better feedback, because I would like to give feedback to each of the
Uh-huh.
reading responses.
Right.
And maybe at least when I am in a new year or new academic year,
Right.
doing these kinds of activities over the course of the year, so that way it's not a new thing for
Right, so it
them.
doesn't suddenly come at them, yes,
Yeah.
2/3 of the way through the school
Like,
year.
I want them
Yeah.
me to tell them,
Right.
don't write about plot at the beginning of the year
Right.
rather than at the end of the year. So
Right.
that way, maybe I can take them further than I was able to take this class.
Right. And how have your students responded now that you were doing that all the way through the PACT week, and now that you have a chance to, as we said, reflect on it and perhaps use it as your indication of an assessment measure of your students in this second week after the PACT? What are you seeing?
So I found when I was looking at their comments on their peers' papers, I was really excited because they were writing things that I wrote to them on their papers, like, oh, maybe you can, now you've analyzed the quote, now let's make a prediction about something later in the chapter. And I was like, yay, good, do that, because I think my worry is that I'll write something or give them feedback and then just
yeah, exactly.
blow it off.
Right. Yes.
But
I actually have an anecdote on that that confirms that. A good friend of mine was doing research on how to improve the comments that he wrote at the end of papers, and basically how to improve the whole business of giving feedback on papers. So he gave feedback to his freshmen, and then was interviewing his freshmen. He got to about the third freshman, and the freshman was listening very patiently to Mr. Hahn's questions. And he said, Mr. Hahn, I'm getting the sense from your questions that you actually expect us to read your comments. And Mr. Hahn said, oh, how interesting. I think I'm going to have to rethink this whole research project.